In our editorial of today, taking further look into external self-determination through referendum, the case of Ambazonia by Marcus F. Abendong. We'll continue with the subject matter of Ambazonian independence referendum. Marcus F. Abendong notes, whereas the Southern Cameroons and similar oppressed peoples of the world have legitimate aspirations to independence, according to the United Nations Charter, the United Nations Trusteeship Agreement, and the UN Resolutions 1514, the world body is not reputed for upholding, respecting, and implementing its own instruments of law. If indeed Resolution 390 v. forcing the merger in Eritrea and Ethiopia in total disregard of the aspirations of Eritreans would never have been passed. The irony about this merger is found in the fact that it was pushed by the United States of America, the same country that opposed Southern Cameroon's independence by joining. There, therefore, is no method to the madness of the world body, the writer comments. It is entirely in accordance with the statutes of the United Nations that the Southern Cameroons expects the world body to return to the drawing board and autocorrect or rectify its own errors. If this had been done after the fathers of the Southern Cameroons, Foncha and Muna, visited the UN in 1995, the world would have been spared the present genocide going on in the territory. If the United Nations decides to do so now, it will spare the lives that are yet to be lost. It will stop the continuous suffering of scores of thousands in dry exile in countries like Nigeria and Ghana. It will spare the international community scarce financial resources that it will commit to sponsor mediated negotiations and/or a referendum. Returning to the drawing board to correct its own errors will go a long way to reaffirm the United Nations commitment to world peace and justice, to international law and order. But in this world body committed to these noble ideals is the question. As it stands, mediated negotiations are no longer a highly considered option following La République du Cameroon's shameful withdrawal from the Swiss-led process and from its own Canadian initiative. Unlike some people think, mediated negotiations can last for years and be more costly. Millions of dollars will be committed to negotiations, and while it lasts, lives will continue to be lost, and the suffering of the people will last the time that it takes for the more powerful sovereign belligerent to come to terms with the truth. Negotiations out of the way, the next sensible option is what the interim government is currently pursuing, and that is seeking outright recognition. This effort has been ongoing since the Republic of Ambazonia and the Southern Cameroon's National Council were created decades ago. For this to happen, it is important that the struggle convince upwards of 35 UN member countries before the matter is tabled to the United Nations General Assembly. With this number, we will have enough voices to make sure that such a move is not crushed and that it sails through. If Yaoundé was compelled to choose from the scale of options, it will not go for a referendum, but will prefer a mediated settlement, not because it can prevail at the table, but for the simple reason that it can make the process last for as long as possible. In the meantime, it will continue to have access to Ambazonia's natural resources. On the other hand, it would take a maximum of 18 months for a referendum to be conducted after a UN resolution is passed. La République du Cameroon and France will not be able to stand in the way of a UN resolution to organize a referendum once Ambazonia succeeds to get powerful, sympathetic nations to back the case. Considering the fact that inconsistency has been the norm within the United Nations, it is but normal that the Southern Cameroon struggle contemplates the possibility of a referendum as a tool to divide the two warring parties. As part of the independence restoration reflections, what demands will the interim government and the Ambazonian people make of the world body to ensure a credible referendum? A fear has been expressed that such a referendum will be conducted on the territory by La République du Cameroon with French support. That fear, indeed, on the writer's perspective, is legitimate, but he dares say it is completely unfounded. Precedence shows that many things are considered to determine the organization of such a vote. Foremost among these considerations is the democratic culture of the oppressor country. The world already knows French position on the conflict. France did not support the Swiss talks. It did not support even the Canadian offer to mediate. We have cited prominently in the study the Eritrean and the East Timorese independence referendums. We saw in the first case that the Eritreans, not the central government in Addis Ababa, organized the referendum from identification of voters through registration to voting and results declaration with only oversight from the central government and UN observation. The Eritrean example cannot hold in the Southern Cameroon's context because the Southern Cameroon has not exercised sovereignty over matters of elections since 1972. We saw in the second case, East Timor, that the United Nations assumed full responsibility of the organization of the referendum vote, beginning from voter identification through registration, voting, counting, and computing, to declaration of the referendum results. Why the great disparity in the two referendums is the question. The answer, we already said, is found in the democratic culture of the peoples. The 1951 agreement binding Eritrea to Ethiopia granted the smaller nation Eritrea sovereignty over matters of elections, and this was respected and exercised. Indonesia, on the other hand, stood up to the United Nations for decades. Between 1975 and 1982, for example, Indonesia ignored the 09 UNGA resolutions, calling upon it to respect the sovereign wish of the East Timorese people. Indonesia could not therefore be trusted to organize and run a transparent referendum in East Timor. An independence referendum to decide the future of the Southern Cameroons cannot, in the light of the above and what the world already knows of La République du Cameroun, be entrusted to Yaoundé. The La République du Cameroun on democratic culture is legendary worldwide. This is in fact one of few countries where elections are won before they are conducted. During the 2018 presidential elections, La République du Cameroun's Minister of the Interior, Atanga Njipol, announced the outcome of the vote in anticipation, and so it stood. Much earlier in 1992, the La République du Cameroun Supreme Court President, Alexis de Panda M., while declaring doctored elections results, said before the international community that his hands were tied after citing a plethora of election malpractices. Now, the lessons from presidencies for Ambazonia, from the Quebecois, Scottish, Eritrean, and East Timorese independence referendums, a Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia independence referendum can draw to apply the following measures if it comes down to it. 1. That on account of the established undemocratic culture of La République du Cameroun, a Southern Cameroon's independence referendum vote should be organized from voters' identification to results declaration by the United Nations organization. 2. That those qualified to vote should be the same who voted in the 1961 plebiscite and their children. 3. The La République du Cameroun citizens who have settled in the territory before and after the 1961 plebiscite and takeover are not qualified to vote. 4. That people who lay claims to Southern Cameroun citizenship through one of their parents can also vote. These should show proof of their attachment to Amazonia by the way of investments back on the territory and or by residence. 5. That as is the case with such referendums, Southern Cameroonians in the diaspora will take part in the referendum except those with permanent residence in La République du Cameroun. This addresses the fear that Southern Cameroonians living in the enemy's territory do not put their vested interest and investments in La République du Cameroun before the interest of homeland. This measure will also protect them from the expected backlash from the native citizens of La République du Cameroun in cities like Yaoundé, Eboloa, and Saint-Malima. Now, the sixth point here is that measures be taken to make sure that La République du Cameroun citizens who used the Southern Cameroon struggle to acquire asylum in the United States and Europe do not take part in the vote. 7. That the United Nations organization should take measures to preempt a violent reaction from La République du Cameroun security forces and from pro-La République du Cameroun militias, as was the case in East Timor. The deployment of an elaborate United Nations peacekeeping mission should take place before the start of the referendum process. 8. That a UNSC resolution should be passed to forestall violent reactions within La République du Cameroun against Southern Cameroons living in their territory in the aftermath of the independence referendum vote. Cameroonians, Beti and Bulu, are well known for their uncautioned xenophobic reactions following the launching of the SDF in 1990, and Wondo and Bulu clansmen prepared themselves to take over properties of southern Cameroonians in Yaoundé once the word was given. In the wake of the 2018 rigged presidential elections, shops and businesses belonging to Bamilekes in Sang-Malima, Paul Biya's native hometown, were attacked and looted under the watchful eyes and supervision of security forces. Nobody has been brought to book for these atrocities. Now, in conclusion, our writer says what Ambazonian needs at the moment is not endless discussions that do not contribute in any way to advance the struggle. How does anybody actually go around screaming referendum from rooftops hoping to free the homeland? Those who truly seek the liberation of Ambazonia know what they should do: raise money and get the Ambazonian Restoration Forces to meet La République du Cameroon soldiers, tank for tank, AK for AK. The writer's opinion continues that whatever way freedom will come, firepower on the territory will determine how soon it happens. Chris Anno and the Canadian club cannot go around asking the Ambazonian Restoration Forces to stop fighting and at the same time asking for a referendum. It is duplicity and treachery that make the referendum call suspicious. From the writer's perspective, he goes on to say, from the above brief reflection, it seems clear that it is not in the power of the oppressed to determine the tool with which the solution to their problem are granted. It is in their power to precipitate whatever means freedom comes through by intense firepower. Our writer F. Abendong believes that Ambazonia can, like the Eritreans, win this war and impose what they want on Yaoundé. He believes being able to prove that referendums are a viable means by which issues of external self-determination are addressed. If Amazonians has been delayed, it is because no country has been sensitive enough to feel the pains of the southern Cameroon's people, or that Amazonia has not wailed enough in the public square of the international diplomacy. Now, that is why there is no country to sponsor a UNGA resolution or to take the Southern Cameroon's case to the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, which court should interpret the constitutionality of the 1961 plebiscite. If the United Nations organization were led by just men, if the UN statutes were applied as it should, if it were truly about justice and peace in the world, we would not be here pondering how justice and peace will come to the Southern Cameroons. The UN is much more about the interests of sovereign nations. That means the oppressed, unrepresented peoples of the world have to fight hard, endure a great deal and for long, until some sovereign nation gets to sympathize with their predicament. The beautiful UN Charter notwithstanding, Ambazonia is 62 years and counting since this grave injustice was done to an innocent and unsuspecting people who counted on the goodwill of the United Nations as enshrined in its charter and the trusteeship agreement. Justice may take long in coming. Negotiations may not happen because it takes two to negotiate. It may take forever to get even one UN member country to sympathize with the Amazonian cause. It might take forever for UN resolutions to be passed calling for a referendum. The writer is completely in agreement with those who believe that the Southern Cameroon's Amazonian independence struggle is God-ordained, and he affirms his faith in the virtues and ideals of the United Nations. The writer also comes to terms with the inherent weaknesses of this international body and believes firmly that God will use the laws that this body has set up for itself to do justice to the oppressed peoples of the world, not necessarily in the way and time that they want, but when and how God wants, he believes. For the moment, there is one thing the Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia must do. Our writer believes they should be strong and enduring in raising funds and in resisting the enemy in all his moves on the territory and in the diaspora. Those who faint will only delay victory. Those who seek the easy way out do us great harm. Freedom is never granted on a platter of gold. Those who love it give their lives for it, while we intensify our search for sympathetic countries towards recognition. We should also prepare ourselves in case another option shows up. More advice says whether it is through negotiations, recognitions at this point, plebiscite or referendum, whichever method he believes God chooses to use, he will by it grant victory to the oppressed. Our writer F. Abendong goes on to say that the one truth that those seeking to cast off the yoke of bondage from their necks must bear in mind is that justice will always be granted to those who seek it. They only should not faint, they should not surrender, whatever way it comes, it will be granted, as he believes justice is of God. Our writer F. Abendong wrote this article intending to make it an academic exercise into which stakeholders of the Southern Cameroon struggle can dip freely, and he guarantees that the facts herein contained are authentic, found online, but then takes full responsibility for the slant, perception, and interpretations, noting that political theories are always at variance with practice. That accounts for the inconsistencies we find between what the UN Charter and other instruments define on the one hand, and the practice of diplomacy on the other. International relations or diplomacy may be a crooked art, but it is dynamic as it takes advantages of opportunities. And with that, we've come to the end of this comprehensive article by Marcus F. Abendong and the end of our editorial of tonight. If you want more of such interesting articles, kindly visit our website at www.abcambatv.com for more. Subscribe, become a club member, and a part of this winning strategy. Find our payment details on your screen. I'm reporting for Undaunted ABC Amba TV.